Welcome, everyone, to the show Lions Do Not Bow. My name is Nathaniel Pawlowski. I'm a law student. I'm the son of Pastor Archer Pawlowski. Together, we will be doing this show to discuss the Bible, politics, history, current events, trends, ideas, and many other things. And first episode, we talked about my dad's journey from communism to Canada. Second episode, we talked about his testimony. Third episode, we talked about what he's been doing the last 25 years and all the problems and court cases and arrests and everything else that's been going on in his life the last 25 years since he's been saved and called into ministry work. And today will be our last introductory episode. It'll be also the last one that is long form. We will be doing short form videos after today's episode. Today, again, there's a lot to talk about. We have to talk about everything from 2020 up until now, the entire COVID era. And there's so much to talk about. There's so much meat and different things and events that happened. And we're going to try to dissect it all for you. So it will be a longer video today. But after that, we will focus on one topic. So episode 5, we'll talk about one topic and it'll be short form videos. But today, again, we're going to be doing an introductory episode to talk about the COVID era. So without further ado, here's my dad, and we're gonna start from the beginning. We're gonna start from 2020, the January 1st, 2020. That's what we'll start with, and we'll finish with what's going on today.
Well, good to see you, Nathaniel, again. Yes, there is so much to talk about. I mean, crazy things. We have never seen something like this on a global scale. It was a very colorful time, just like my shirt. Very colorful. Lots of things, a lots of twists, a lots of things that normal people would never believe that are even possible in a free and democratic society. So the story starts at the beginning of 2020, and lots of people do not know that we have become, our ministry has become the first target of this totalitarian regime. And for what? Most people, when you look at the social networks and the crazy Antifa and others, they will call me anti-vaxxer. They will call me a COVID denier, all kinds of different things. But the truth, of course, is different. The truth is that we were attacked for feeding the poor. And that's why it's so important to continue the story, because as you remember, the beginning of our trouble, my trouble, was simply doing my job, feeding the poor, and giving people messages of hope. My first arrest was not for defying the orders or the mandates or the craziness of the corrupted government. My first arrest was simply for reading a Bible to 6 people in the public park without amplification.
Which we talked about last episode and the episode before that, because this is important. This didn't start. A lot of people know you now today from COVID, from the Get Out video where you called out the Nazis, which we'll talk about today, where you called the police officers that came storming into the church to shut it down. You called them Nazis. That went viral. You were arrested in the highway and on the tarmac. So a lot of people know you from that. But this didn't start with that. And that's why our earlier episodes are so important, so that people can gain some context that this didn't start with COVID. This started long before. This has been a snowballing effect of how tyranny rolls in. Okay, the decline, the fall of the Roman Empire was gradual, and it was a slow decline. And that's exactly what we see in Canada. Of course, you grew up under communism, which if people want to hear about that, they can go back to watch episode 1. But that's why you were warning people for so many years, because something like this only can happen when you have a system that allows for this communism to kind of take over. And that's what you've been warning people about for the last 20 years. And that's why people need to understand. And this is why we're doing these episodes, is so that people understand why you're doing what you're doing, who you are, and that this didn't start with COVID. This didn't just start because you wanted to be a rebel for the sake of being a rebel. You have seen that the government has been gradually taking away and eroding Christian principles and our fundamental rights and freedoms in our country. And look how everything changed in one day. One day, everything changed. The entire globe changed in one day. And at a snap of the finger, the government said, you no longer have any rights because of this emergency. In Rome, that was also, they call it the final act. There was these emergency powers that were given. And that was the steady decline and collapse of the empire. And here we're seeing it today, an emergency, a so-called emergency. Of course, we know now that it was completely unjustified and not a real emergency, but they took away our rights and freedoms in one day in early 2020. And you are telling people now that you were one of, if not the first person, one of the first people to actually feel that the repercussions of the government on you for defying those orders. And to be fair, when this first happened, and I was still living under your roof at this time, and we were all a little bit confused when this first came in. We were all a little bit like, "Whoa, is this the Black Plague? What is going on now?" We didn't know. January, February, and then March came around, and everyone's kind of confused. The government's freaking out. The world's gone to a standstill, and we were a little bit confused. But then we started to actually, and this was pretty early on, where we started to actually understand what this was about. We actually started to understand that what they're telling us is not backed by any medical science, anything that's actually scientific or based on the scientific method. And we finally came to the realization that, oh, this is complete lies. This is a hoax. They're actually trying to trick it. This is not real. And then you started to continue, you continued the ministry, and tell us about that.
Yeah, so you mentioned Roman Empire. Well, let me just highlight a little bit later dates. I mean, what happened during the Nazi era? We have to understand that it took Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party 6 years to implement over 2,000 little laws against the Jewish people. So before the Second World War started, there were already signs left and right what is happening, what the Nazi party is doing. I mean, you don't have to be a very smart person. You don't have to be a genius. The only thing you needed was to read his book, Mein Kampf, right? My Struggle by Adolf Hitler, that he penned that in prison, letting the whole world know how nutcase he is, how crazy are his ideas. So it was not a surprise. What I'm trying to say, Nathaniel, and to the people, it was not a surprise for those that were watching and paying attention. It was a surprise for those that didn't care, for those that preferred hockeys and restaurants and soccer and the bread and the circus, like you mentioned, the Roman Empire. So for those types of people, I just care about my paycheck. I don't care
And
about
most
politics.
importantly, it's people that don't understand history. That's why you and I talk about history so much. It's the people that have not been taught history or have not studied history for themselves that are so blinded to what is right in front of them. There's that famous quote that if you do not learn from history, you are destined to repeat it. And that's why this is so important. That's why these conversations are so important, so that people can understand. And people like you saw this miles ahead. You saw this in 2005 and you were warning people, hey, this is what's coming. And then 2020 was kind of that culmination of everything that you've been talking about earlier coming to fruition. And in one day, there's a pastor that was saying that in one day, Christianity can become illegal. And that happened during COVID. Whether
Yeah.
they admit it or not, or whether these mega churches understand that or not, in one day, being a true Bible believing Christian became outlawed.
Yes, that's absolutely accurate. Well, for me, at the very beginning, just like everybody else, I mean, I did not have the access to the information. I didn't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a doctor. I had no clue. But I knew that we have seen something like this before. Let's say the pandemic was real. Let's say that this was the next Black Plague. Let's say disaster was happening. Well, when you go back in history again, we have seen something like this before, and the church was always the one that would take care of the sick. Church was always commanded to give the messages of hope and feed the poor. So I just simply wanted to continue what through generations, through thousands of years, good people were commanded by God to do. I knew, Nathaniel, that this was a lie. I'm not denying, again, for the record, I'm not denying that there is no sickness. Sickness is all around us. And we had been attacked by this virus, this pathogen, decades ago. This is nothing new. It has been existing and it probably will exist until Jesus comes back. That's just the reality of a fallen.
Colds and flus have been around for
And,
thousands and thousands of
and
years since the very beginning.
people were dying because of colds, and they will be dying until maybe one day we'll have a cure, complete cure to that. So
Even in the Bible, there's a story of an official's child who had such a high fever, and there's different stories. Fevers were deadly. Fevers
yes,
could kill you. Now they didn't have ibuprofen. They didn't have the methods that we have today. It's
yes.
just a reality of life.
And but I knew that what the government is saying was a big fat lie, because they started to use the same copy paste rhetorics, just as I remembered growing up. So our story with this craziness started at the beginning of 2020, when the officials from the city of Calgary contacted me and they said, well, we are in the middle of this crisis, and we're shutting down shelters and we're shutting down soup kitchens, and you have to stop feeding the poor. And I'm thinking to myself, like, there is something crazy going on here, because let's say that's how I was thinking. Let's say they're right. Let's say that we are in the middle of this evil craziness and people are dying left and right. Well, what is going to happen to 15 to 20,000 different individuals facing homelessness in the city of Calgary if you shut down shelters and you stop feeding them? Well, I know, because I have been doing this for 26 years. They're going to turn into into crime. They're going to become violent. They're going to get the necessities of life this way or that way. They will break into cars, into garages, into houses, into grocery stores. People need to eat. Pandemic or not, people need to eat. You need to feed them, and they will get what they desperately need this way or that way. So I replied to the mayor, and I replied to the officials, and then I
And
simply said,
at this point, did you get a physical letter from the city of Calgary or the police? What document did you receive telling
yes,
you
yeah, they openly told me I have to stop. I have to stop feeding the poor. They sent me multiple letters. I replied to those letters.
the actual government officials of the city?
Yes, yes. I mean, we were in the middle of crisis, and we have to stop feeding the poor, because if we dare to feed the poor, people are going to die. I mean, it didn't make any sense, but hey, I decided at that time to play the game. So I did everything by the book. They sent me a letter. I replied. I challenged them. I told them that what they're saying doesn't make any sense. They didn't care. And then I appealed it to the premier. Premier is like the governor in the United States, is the head of the province. I replied. I sent a letter to him asking for help. I actually sent a letter to every minister, every cabinet minister, asking for help. And I said, listen, they're shutting down shelters. It doesn't make any sense. Those people are going to turn violent. People are actually going to die because of this decision. This decision is wrong. Let me feed the poor. And if you want me to keep the distance, if you want me to do all kinds of different things, I'm all for it. I'm fine. I'm okay. I will do what's necessary to save lives. And of course, no one replied. Instead, 12 officers showed up, health inspectors, bylaw services, and Calgary police. And I was surrounded by those people. It was minus 35, I think. I know it was extremely cold, because during those extreme cold weathers, I always wear my hunting gear, because that's the warmest clothes I have, minus 50. And, um, and they showed up. They told me I have to stop what I'm doing. I received the first COVID ticket in the country. I became with another lady, I was told, because they did a press conference later on. So it was me and another lady. We received the first ticket under this craziness.
So
And
that's a ticket. That's just to clarify,
health,
that's a ticket for violating COVID mandates of the government.
Yes, and the first is 1,200, then is escalate.
$1,200.
It's 100,000, I think. Then there's a million, and I
So
received.
first offense is $1,200. Second offense can go up to $100,000, and third offense can go up to $1,000,000. Because I
And
remember, I
and
remember seeing that posted actually when we were still at a different location. When you had a different location at a different church building, the government, AHS, Alberta Health Services, came and they put up a little placard and they said that if you're violating these rules, the 50, they kept changing their arbitrary rules, but it was 50 for a while, 50 people max, you can be charged up to $1,000,000, $1 million fine for violating this after your second or third offense.
yes, so I received millions of dollars worth of tickets, as you remember later on, but I'll tell you all about it later. So what happened was the police were aggressive. They assaulted one of our parishioner. We
And this is
recorded.
on camera. So just so people know that we're not just telling you a story, you can find all these videos actually online. At that time, Rebel News was covering most of it. It went completely viral because one of your parishioners was pushed by a police officer, and you were there wearing your hunting gear. It was minus 35 degrees Celsius, and the police came to shut down your soup kitchen. Who There weren't that many people in the lineup, but there was a few very hungry, desperate people. It's minus
Yeah,
35, and they came out because they needed food, and you
yeah.
were feeding them, and they came, and you were recording the whole thing, and they came violently, aggressively. So if this is the one thing that just baffles me. We're in the middle of this deadly pandemic. We're in the middle of this deadly virus that's spreading, and they're coming to protect people and make sure that nobody's going to get harmed or hurt. And they came within that 6 feet, pushed a person, and came up to you, pushing you, and they were getting right up in your face. No masks, no nothing, just getting right up in your face. So spreading the virus.
Yeah, of course, nothing made sense. Later, when I was arrested by the police, I observed them in the police station when they thought no one is watching. The masks were down, the gowns were thrown, no social distancing, laughing, joking, eating together. Of course, all of that was, Hollywood production. It was a
Absolute
theater.
hypocrisy. And I want to talk about this before you continue the story of that first encounter with the police in 2020, which was, by the way, after 5 years of peace. So last episode we talked about what you've been doing from 2005 to now, and you talked about how you had problems with the courts basically from 2005 to 2015. You call that the 10-year war. And you had 5 years of peace until COVID. And that's what we're talking about today. But I want to talk about that hypocrisy and why even to start defying those mandates, because of everything that did not make sense. It was not adding up. People were telling you to stop feeding the homeless, even though they're going to be in their most desperate hour. Also, other places were seemingly exempt. And what were those places? Marijuana stores, liquor stores, abortion clinics. It made no sense. Why were those places, Walmart, Costco, IKEA, they were exempt from these mandates? And yet they were telling you, someone who's feeding the homeless, to shut down your shelter, to shut down your soup kitchen, to shut down what you're doing, your ministry, because of COVID. But yet all these other places were allowed to function at almost full capacity. So it didn't make sense. None of it added up to anything that was logical or scientific or medical in any way. And that's why we knew that this was a lie. This made no sense. There's someone at the top who was playing a game, because no human being with two brain cells and any kind of logical cognition would be able to fall for this. It made no sense. And that's why you defied. I mean, you continued to feed them. And of course, your main reasoning was, one, because God always tells you to take care of those people, not to neglect them because of a virus. Actually, the Bible teaches you otherwise, to lay hands on the sick. So you're supposed to have so much faith that you're not even afraid of any disease. And of course, because that's your mandate, you're meant to feed the homeless and take care of them. So you were there, it's minus 35. The police come to shut you down. They're shoving and pushing and showing their authority, and they write you a ticket.
And they say if I ever do it again, I will be immediately arrested. While you were mentioning all those different organizations that were exempt, I don't know if you remember, we went with you actually to IKEA to get you a bed. And I don't know if you remember, I did the video. I think it was taken down within minutes. But I showed the people the
Oh, and
hypocrisy.
that's another, sorry to interrupt. That's another point. The censorship that we encountered during COVID was like nothing I've ever encountered my entire life. So I think maybe it rivals even the censorship of communist Poland that you grew up under, because it was insane. I mean, we don't have censorship like that today. Thankfully, there's platforms that even YouTube is not as Nazi fascist censorship as it was during COVID. And that was scary, because any video that you put on, even mentioning the word COVID or mandates or masks, was immediately flagged and removed. And I think people forget that point, that we were actually banned from saying anything contrary to what the mainstream media and government officials were saying. They were saying 6 feet, masks, social distancing, vaccines. And you were just saying, like, maybe we should look into this stuff. This stuff doesn't add up. And even for saying that, flagged, removed, banned, blocked. And that was very scary. But yes, to your point, we went to IKEA to buy me a bed, and you put a video that actually was removed for just observing what you saw.
Yeah, so on the door, I don't know if you remember that, it said only 500 people allowed. So I could take the homeless and half of my neighborhood to IKEA, and that would be perfectly fine and lawful. But I could not have a brother for a coffee in my home because I would be a lawbreaker. And anyway, I don't know if you remember, you talked about censorship when we went to California on the speaking tour. I don't know if you remember, we went to the pier and we were walking on the beach, and there was thousands upon thousands of people. And I always thought, because of the narration of the propaganda media, that California is completely shut down, that you're not allowed to eat in restaurants, you're not
And
allowed
this
to
was
come.
during a time where Canada was complete lockdown, no going out, like complete social, like
That's
all
right.
the mandates were still in place.
But also California, we were told, is completely shut down, and we went there and we were eating in restaurants. And I don't know if you remember, I did this little video pretty much telling people this is how freedom looks like, and it lasted literally a second. When I
Yeah.
posted it, it was removed immediately, and I didn't say anything except
No, and
this
I
is how
remember
freedom.
you. I was right beside you when you were filming that video. You were just showing people on the beach, not social distancing, on the pier, having a good
Yeah,
time, enjoying themselves. I mean, maybe 10,000 people were there on that beach that day.
yeah,
It was just a fun time. Everyone was just living their life in the sunshine.
and that's
And
California.
you didn't even mention COVID. You just said this is, you literally said like 3 words. You said this 4 words. This is what freedom looks like, or 5 words, and that's all. For those words, your account was actually flagged, and you got a strike
And
for your youth.
the video was removed, and of course I had a huge YouTube channel, millions of views, a big following, and all of that was gone in a split of a second for nothing, for literally nothing, just telling people the truth. And it was taken down. But going back to the story, at that moment I knew without a shadow of a doubt what is happening. I knew that this is a test. I was shocked that it's a global test, because you got to remember, when we were growing up behind the Iron Curtain, it was a regional attack on our lives. We always look at the West. We look at the France, England. We looked at America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. We looked at those places, and they were the places of hope and freedom. But this time around, it was a global takeover. It was like copy paste. The tyrants implemented their people all over the world, and they were pushing the same narrative. They were pushing the same globalist agenda of a great takeover or reset, whatever you want to call it. A total police state tyranny like we have never seen before on a global scale. So I continued, as you remember, to do what God called us to do. We kept meeting in the church, and we kept feeding the poor. And that was 2020. Every time I would show up, which was 3 times a week to feed the poor, I would have police, I would have bylaw services, sometimes 4 5, sometimes 15 police officers at our church services. And the culmination of 2020 happened at the Christmas festival, or maybe before, about a month before, when the Canadian politicians on all levels, the federal, the provincial, and municipal, came on television and they canceled Christmas. And I could not believe it, because the same people just a few days before were wishing children a happy Halloween. The same people were telling children, hey, go out there and have fun, just be careful, blah, 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 blah. And then a few days later, the same actors came on television. They said, we have to regret, but we're canceling Christmas, and that's it. The chief of police said that if his officers are going to spot extra cars in people's driveways, they're going to break the doors, they're going to arrest everyone, and you cannot have your father for dinner. You cannot have Christmas dinner celebrations, nothing. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, will people put up with this garbage? So I went on television too, and I invited people to the biggest Christmas celebration in the country. And, I thought a few hundred people would show up, but thousands came. And we had AAA steaks, and we had gifts for the homeless, and we had also, I think we kind of broke a record, at least our record. We had, 120 police officers. We got 20 cops on bicycles, 54 police cars, chief of police, anti-terrorist, special gang unit with the telescopic cameras on the roofs. We had bylaw services, health inspectors, you name it. Everyone was there. We were vilified by the politicians. We were vilified by the media, and our parishioners and the people that were invited to speak, the guests, were intimidated, harassed, threatened with tickets. And the chief of police came, and I talked to him. And apparently, I did something that was unthinkable. I did something so disastrous that the whole city is going to collapse and die. I, at that time, I don't know if people remember, the problem I have with the people, Nathaniel, is they have a very short memory. But at that time, singing was outlawed in Canada. In Canada, you were not allowed to sing. No Lord's Supper, no eating together, no having coffee. I mean, everything was completely illegal and
And they
shut down.
specifically mentioned singing. I do remember this. The media, the politicians, the health officials, they specifically mentioned that you should not be singing, and that Christmas carols would also be not allowed during that time because mandates were in full effect during that Christmas.
Yeah, and I was told I did the unthinkable because we hired carolers and they were singing Christmas carols. We had a great time. No one died. We had AAA steaks for the poor. We had huge lineups and thousands of people that came to participate in the illegal, in quote, Christmas celebration. And that's fascinating because for that I received 15 tickets, which it took me 2 years to fight. I mean, worth millions of dollars, because every time that you get another one, it was a higher and higher and higher. So it took me 2 years to fight this, and I won in court, believe it or not. I won that fight. And then 2021 came, and I'm going to try to speed up because otherwise we're going to talk for 3 hours. So what happened was we were meeting in the building, but we also did 3 times a week the soup kitchen, the church for the poor, that's called Street Church. And if you want to see how it looks, go to streetchurch.ca. And I was shocked when the authorities came at the beginning of 2021. So that's 1 year later. So we were subjected with this harassment and intimidation and pure pressure, force, media, politicians involving themselves into this fight, vilifying us, calling us names, the grandpa killers, the grandma destroyers, and all kinds of different names. And when we came at the beginning of 2021, I was shocked that there was police officers, health inspector, and the bylaw services and peace officers blocking the driveway to the church, the parking lot. Of course, completely illegal. They blocked the parking lot and they demanded that we let them into the sanctuary and we shut down the church service. I came out, our associate pastor Peter came out, and we talked to them, and I filmed it. And to this day, you can see it on Street Church YouTube channel. You can see the interaction with the authorities, the Bible services, and I was shocked. It was completely illegal. It was crazy. I mean, the law enforcement agencies, in collusion with each other, came to literally prevent people from attending a church service by blocking the parking. So people park in different places. They still walked, and we still had a church service. So that didn't work. So what the government did, they started to pressure the owners of the building, because we were renting from somebody else, and they started to threaten the owners. And I received a phone call a few weeks after this incident, and I was told that the city of Calgary is threatening to shut down the entire building. The city of Calgary is threatening them with $10,000 tickets, just to start with, and that we have to vacate the building. And I was shocked. I was shocked. He says, "Well, you're no longer allowed to come back." And well, I said, "That's unacceptable. You have to give us time." And we negotiated 3 weeks, and within those 3 weeks we were able, thank God, to find another facility. But this is what was happening: the collusion, the harassment, the intimidation, all the agencies of the government together trying to destroy Christianity, trying to their best to
And this wasn't
pressure.
a large building. This was a small church. There wasn't many people attending at this time. And again, at this same time, Walmart, Costco, Safeway, Amazon, abortion clinics, marijuana stores, liquor stores, all allowed to operate full capacity essentially. Most of the time they were not even restricted for their capacity, and yet churches had all these agencies coming in to block parking lots and ticket and harass and phone the owners and do all this stuff to stop a little church service from going on.
And for the people, you got to remember, all of that was unlawful. We have provisions within our constitution, and of course, our highest law, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, with its preamble that states, whereas Canada acknowledges the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Also, in the sections of the Criminal Code of Canada, there are provisions, section 176, 1, 2, and 3, which makes it completely illegal for the authorities to do this to the places of worship. And let me just add something to this story. The mosques were not shut down. Thousands of Muslims were able to participate and worship. I attended I attended the service in the city of Calgary just to find out with my own eyes, and I recorded it. I have it with me. I've recorded the services for the Muslims in their mosques, and no issues, no police, no health inspectors, no Bible services, no harassment, no intimidation, no shutting them down. This was directed only at the Christians and the Jewish people. The Hindus were able to meet, the Muslims were able to meet. Not one imam was arrested during this time, but multiple pastors all across this country were arrested, ticketed. Thousands of people were taken to courts, punished with the process of defending themselves. So, going back to the story, we lost the place of worship because of this harassment. We had to look for another facility. We found it, and we moved the church to this new one. And thank God, the owner of this new facility was a man from Haiti, a black man. And I talked to him about this craziness, and he says, "Don't worry, Art. I fought with the government. I know how crooked those people are. And I'm telling you, if they come after you, I will defend you. I will fight. I will fight those people." And that's exactly what happened. And I'm very grateful to this man, because the government pressured him. The city of Calgary pressured him, and they said, "You have to kick this church out. You have to keep Pawlowski out of the building." or else. And he says, well, I'll take or else. I'll fight you in the court. You're not going to pressure me. I rented this facility. This facility is Art's responsibility at this moment. You have an issue with Art Pulaski, go and talk to Art Pulaski. And he did it a beautiful job. Of course, from the legal point of view, it was a master plan. He shifted everything back to me, and so they started to harass me again. And the first harassment was with the telescopic cameras. I don't know if you remember, the health inspector would park across from our new church and would snap pictures of every woman, every child, every parishioner, which is tactics of the Nazis. This is the tactics I remember that were done by the communist Russia, the
Yeah,
Soviet Russia.
KGB, that was a very popular method because they would have to take pictures and then they would look into those people's lives and who they're associated with. And they'd say, hey, I have a picture of you doing this. And then they would blackmail you or try to bribe you. But first they blackmail you and then you'd be on the hook to them.
Not only that, the famous way of dealing with political dissidents was, well, here's a picture of your wife, here's a picture of your daughter. We know where she goes to school. You know what can happen to a 15-year-old daughter of yours? I mean, all kinds of things can happen to her. I mean, this is a very evil place. So she might be walking back from school and you don't want her to be raped, right? I mean, you love your daughter, right? Right? Do the right thing. Stop this nonsense. Don't oppose us. Just shut your mouth. Don't talk about the government. Those were the tactics of the KGB. Those were the tactics of the Stasi, the Nazis, the tyrants. And the same tactics were they started to implement here in the city of Calgary, in our beloved Canada. Well, we confronted that man, recorded everything, and boom, he takes off. And April of 2021 shows up, and very important for the people to understand that we are under duress, we are under stress, we are under harassment and ongoing non-stop intimidation now for over a year. It started for me at the beginning of 2020. Now is April of 2021. We have Passover celebration, which is the holiest time of the year. This
And
is the death.
before this, they tried one more tactic. And I think they got away with this, which bothers me incredibly. But that's the tactics of the media. So when physical force with the police and the bylaw didn't work, and then of course the mandates, the words that the politicians were saying that were considered like law, even though there were not laws at all, they were contradictory to the rule of law that we have in our country. But these mandates that they were talking about didn't work. The enforcement of them didn't work, and then they resulted the threat of the enforcement and the tickets that didn't work, and then they resorted to another very, very effective tactic, which is ostracizing people and saying very negative things in the media to the public. And this is a very effective tactic that they use. It's propaganda, and the media would label you as this terrorist. They literally said that you're terrorizing the neighborhood because you were having church. That's
Yeah.
all you were doing. You were not doing anything outside. You were not doing anything around the neighborhood at all. You would just walk into a building, have a worship service, preaching, and then go home. And you were terrorizing the neighborhood for doing this. So that was their next tactic that they used, which rallied people, the crazy people that were falling for this lie, to hate you and actually be aggressive to you, which also caused a lot of harm because the media and the politician that were labeling you and calling you names and really bashing you caused people to take up arms against you. And actually people in public started to do harm against you, which I'm sure you'll talk about when that becomes relevant in this story. But that's another tactic that they used that is often overlooked, and that's propaganda and the weaponization of the news media, of the fake news, as some people would call it. And after that didn't work against you in this church, then they resorted to their last kind of crescendo, their last attempt to get you to stop. And that's what happened during Easter.
Yes. So the Passover celebration, the Easter season for us Christians is very important. Is the holiest time of the year. I remember I was preparing myself in the church for about a month for this celebration. Is the death and the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. It's a very important ti- timeline in the year. We look forward to it, and it's a special event. And um, I remember preparing for the message, of course, from the perspective of time. Now I understand why this message was given to me. At that time, I thought it was just Passover. But the title of the message that God put on my heart for that day was Pharaoh, let my people go. Let my people go. So um, when usually we would drive to the church an hour 2 hours before everybody else would show up. We needed to prepare the equipment and the lighting and do all those different things that we needed to do. Some people in the preparation of the church service, some people would come and pray, worshipers would do their practice. So there were few people in the building already. When we were setting up, I was at the pulpit. I just put my cell phone there, shut it off, and then I turned to my left, and on the steps they were weird people, and for a split of a second I did not understand what was going on really, because in our church, as you remember, no one was wearing a muzzle. And then suddenly I see those masked bandits. That's exactly how they looked to me, muzzled up, masked bandits, some uniforms. And it took me a second or two to actually, from the eyes to the brain, it took a while to realize what was happening. And then, of course, okay, the uniforms, the bylaw, the police, some other people, which I didn't know who they were. And I went for the phone. I went back, I took the phone. Why? Because our experience with the law enforcement agencies and the authorities has been the experience we have is that those people have no problem lying to the judges. They have no problem to manipulating, to making stuff up. They have no problem to stand before the judge and just lie. That's our experience from 2005 all the way to 2015, the 10-year war, as you mentioned before. And what I decided to do, because I saw the police officers lying, openly lying, making stuff up. I saw the agents of the state standing in front of the judge, lying, making stuff up, manufacturing documents, all those different things I witnessed during those few years of fighting with them. So I've decided that every time I'm going to talk to the authorities, I need to record a conversation. As you remember, I was accused of resisting arrest. I was accused of cursing, spitting, attacking, saying all kinds of things that I never said. So thank God, early on we learned to record every conversation. So I continued. That's why I grabbed the cell phone, and I started to record. And I had nothing to tell them. For after a year of ongoing nonstop harassment, the only thing I had for those people in my heart was get out, just get out. They were breaking the law, Criminal Code of Canada, Section 176. They were breaking the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They had no right. They were trespassing. I trespassed them before. I told them, you're not allowed to enter our property. Full stop. You're not welcomed here, and we don't want you here. They didn't care. Even though they were trespassing, breaking the law in the name of the law, I didn't want to discuss with them anything anymore. Get out. We had number of conversations. I've told them what I needed to tell them, and I said out. And as you remember, because you were there, you recorded the same thing with your phone, and I did my best to tell them to get out. Someone actually counted how many times I had to tell them get out. Over 30 times I said within those few minutes to those people, get out. Who was there? Well, there was a head health inspector. That was the big honcho. That was the lady that everyone was afraid of. They sent their best. And it's quite fascinating because she came with her Nazi boots, the jack boots. I find this fascinating that I call them Nazis. Of course, at that time, I didn't realize, I didn't look at the lady's boots, but then later on, it turned out, wow, how fitting. Those people are acting like Nazis, and they are dressing themselves right now like Nazis. And police officers, they change their nice blue color into the black. Their vehicles are used to be white and blue. Now they are black, like Nazis. And I made those comments when they were changing the colors, and they said, "Look, it's a repetition of history. I'm telling you." Soon they're going to start acting like Nazis. They already look like Nazis, Gestapo. So it's just a matter of time. And wow, how prophetic was that statement? Because later on, I acted exactly like Nazis. So eventually they go, as you remember. She wanted to talk to me. I had nothing to tell them except out. This was the holiest time of the year. We are here to worship. I don't want you here. Out. And they leave. And they leave. And I remember my feelings. I hope that this is the end of the story. I posted this interaction on my social networks. At that time, I had big following, the big YouTube channel. And and telling you the truth, Nathaniel, I forgot about the video because I've done so many videos, so many interactions. I posted so many of those talks that this was just another one out
Yeah,
of
so
hundreds.
for people to understand, this was not the first run-in with police you've had. Like we've discussed in other episodes, you've been dealing with the police for a long time,
Yeah.
and you had many interactions, and you'd post these interactions with police officers. But this one was different and special, even though you didn't consider it different and special at the time. I remember you posted it, you went up to preach, you finished preaching, and then I looked at the video after you were done preaching, and there was like 40,000 views on it already, just in that 1 hour and a half of the church service. And it went viral. It got picked up by TMZ. It got picked up by Fox News. It got picked up by everyone. CNN, like it was everywhere. It was everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was different. It was a special video. I was there that day. I was just setting up stuff. People were practicing. They were getting ready to worship. There were some people praying in that church. And for context, under Canadian law, nobody is allowed to interfere in a worship service when it is going on, and nobody's allowed to interfere with the worship leader, with a clergyman or clergywoman. You're not allowed to interfere with them while they're in their duty as a clergyman. So they were in direct violation of that. Of course, they also did not have a warrant, and they were coming in to demand. They were demanding, because I was listening to what she was saying. I know you had nothing to say. You were just boiling inside that they came to interrupt on the holiest day in the Christian calendar, to interrupt a service and to shut it down. I was listening to what she was saying, and she wanted to inspect the facility. She wanted to count everybody who was present, because of course they were going to say that we were over capacity, that we're not social distancing, that we're not wearing masks. And they wanted to take pictures and basically gather evidence so that they could create a case against you and shut you down. And of course, you were not listening to them. You just yelled at them. They were at the bottom of the stairs. You were at the top, and you just started to yell at them, get out, you Nazis, you communists. And they did leave. And of course, there were repercussions for this later on, which you'll get into in a second. But people need to understand the context. You grew up under communism. You grew up with parents and grandparents and great grandparents who also went through tyranny. They encountered the ruthless Nazis, the ruthless communists, and they saw patterns. You saw patterns when you grew up under this system.
Yes.
And you had 2 decades worth of experience with these tyrants in Canada who were shutting down a Christian preacher and Christian ministry feeding the homeless. So there's a lot of context that people did not see. They saw this one video, the huge portion of the world. This went viral and on all streaming platforms, on all the channels that played this and replayed it. There was around 1 billion views on this video. And the world saw that, but they didn't see the context. They didn't see your entire life story that led to this, and the entire story of you in Canada that led to this. And people need to understand that there's always context. There's always two sides to every story. And people saw this. However, you actually received a great reception for the most part. The people that were playing this video, it like awoke in them. It stirred something up inside of them, and they started to see. It was the first video. Sorry, it was the second video. There was another video a day before you did this, before this event. The day before, there was a video, and that video was of a British priest who allowed the police into his cathedral or whatever church building, and basically they shut it down. The health authorities and the police shut it down, and the priest kind of allowed it. He kind of went with it. He was this polite, nice
No,
guy.
he said
And
actually the priest asked the people to leave the facility. So he's talking to parishioners and he says, "You gotta go, or else they're going to give us tickets."
so that video was a day before. And then contrast it to the next day where you did this. You called them Nazis, and you were so firm. It was like they were hitting a brick wall. You were like a brick wall to these people. They just could not go through. They couldn't get a word in. You were yelling. You were screaming at them. You were calling them what they were acting like, and they left. They left like with their tails between their legs and like heads down, and they left. And then this video went viral, and there was so much publicity, and the world just picked it up, and it was like a slap in the face. Like there was these two contradictory videos, one of a priest allowing the police to shut down their place of worship, and another of a pastor in Canada with a funny accent who was not allowing this to happen. In that paradoxical kind of two different sides of the Christian coin. And it was just, people were like, wow, we've gone long enough. These people have been doing this to us for like 2 years now. It's been going on. They said 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and here they are shutting down church a year later.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I met with a friend of mine. He was a member of parliament for about 20 years. And I said, Rob, I don't get it. I've done some amazing things in my life, and I've done concerts, marches for Jesus, and Africa, and all those different things that we have been doing. And I don't understand why this me yelling at those people at this moment was watched over 1 billion times. I started to have interviews, Nathaniel, as you remember, 10, 15 interviews a day for a month. I was exhausted. But I kept doing it because I realized that God was doing something very powerful. Here's what he said to me. He says, Art, in a very simple way, with your accent, you articulated what inside people's hearts. They all feel the same way. They feel like yelling and screaming, get out of my church, get out of my hospital, get out of my parliament, get out of the White House, get out of my school, get out of my life. You're Nazis, you're wicked, evil psychopaths. That's what was on inside people's hearts. And when this video went out, I didn't talk much. I just kept repeating the same thing that was in people's hearts. Just get out, you wicked people, you devils. And eventually, as you know, they leave, but they came back with a vengeance. I remember talking to that member of parliament, and he says they would be very foolish if they would attack you again after this exposure, this global exposure. And guess what? 3 weeks later, they
And
came.
I love talking about this, because logic and what's wise to do for them, it doesn't correlate to them that they make these huge mistakes. They make such big mistakes and such obvious mistakes. And sometimes, and I know mom would always pray this prayer that, Lord, confuse the enemy camp. And you do the same. And these prayers, I think, are amazing, because they seem to be so confused, and they make so many stupid mistakes. Like it would be the dumbest thing for them to come back to your church and actually crack down on you. That'll bring the opposite approach. Have they learned nothing from history? Have they learned nothing that uprisings are sparks like that is what brings people to to actually fight. They take up their shields, and that's when their banners, and that's when they take it to the streets. When it's sparks like this, when it's a pastor who's dragged through the highway, which I know you're going to get to in a second, when they come back, like, it would have been the dumbest thing for them to come back after 1 billion views on this video and all this media exposure and all these interviews, and the entire world is watching your church right now. And it would be idiotic for them to come back and to actually do something. And of course they did, because their hatred blinds them. It's
Yeah.
not a hate, like they try to, in their carnal intellectual minds, to be like, well, it's because we're saving lives, we're helping you, or rule of law, or all this stuff. They try to justify it in themselves. But the true answer of why they behave like this is because they hate God, and they hate that you represent him, and you're defying them. You're defying the state, and you're putting God above the state, when the state actually must replace God in their ideology, because they're atheists, or they hate God, they hate the idea of Christianity, and they make the stupidest mistakes. And I know I'm going to talk about a few other mistakes that they made in their hatred. One judge who made the stupidest error he could make as a judge, and he did it because of his hatred for you. And
Yeah.
this actually benefits us. That's the paradox. It's a wonderful thing that God does, and he turns around evil for good, and everything turns around for his glory. But these major mistakes, it seems hopeless at the time, because it's like, oh my goodness, they just did this horrible thing to us. And we're going to talk about that judge in a second, what he did and how hopeless it felt in that moment. But I remember something I said to you, and we're going to get to the story in a second for people to understand. But this judge did something crazy. He did something insane that's never been done before. And he gave you a verdict that was scary. And I remember you standing there at the court steps like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do now? And I said, this is the reason we're going to win the appeal, because he did something idiotic. He did something stupid, and his hatred of you blinded him. And that ended up being correct. And that's what's amazing about this story, is that God turns around everything for his glory. And their hatred of you, that health inspector, or it's the organization, she's just a figurehead, the organization's hatred of you, and this little pastor with a funny accent who's defying them because they feel like they're God, was bothering them. You were a thorn in their side, and they needed to get rid of you. And that's what they did next.
Yeah. So that doesn't mean that, the Bible says, the story of Joseph and his brothers, he was sold by his own family, and then later on he says, what the enemy meant for evil, God turned around for good. But that doesn't mean that in the meantime you're not suffering. You are suffering. It's a crazy times. It's a scary things that those people are doing. They got the badge, they got the pistols, they got the authority to hurt you, and that's exactly what they intended to do. I really hoped that they're going to just leave us alone. I really did, especially after the talk with my friend, the politician. He says they would be extremely stupid if they would attack you after this. But of course, 3 weeks later, they managed to find crooked judges, and that's the
And
game.
sorry, before we continue the story, there's another thing that I want to talk about. One, that's the use of verbiage, because we're still on the story of you yelling at these people, get out, you Nazis, you fascists, you communists. So I want to talk about the verbiage that you used, and why you use that verbiage, because you were criticized a lot by that's an unchristian thing to do. It's an unloving thing to do, to call them names. Of course, this is coming from people who have supposedly read the Bible and read the words of Jesus and all the names that he called the Pharisees, and all the words that the apostles called different government officials. Of course, they supposedly read this Bible, but I want you to explain to people the verbiage you used, and also maybe explain that maybe I'll explain. A lot of people criticize you for saying, they say things like this, that you're looking for a trouble, you're looking for attention, you're just doing this, you want the attention, you want the trouble, as if a 300 plus 350 plus citations at this point, and 16 arrests at this point, and 100 times in court at this point, 7 times having to remortgage your house, and being very financially troubled, as if that was a reward, as if this was a good thing, that you were just planning this the whole time. I mean, it was this incredible mastermind plan that you had because you wanted attention, and because you wanted this. And people make that accusation very often, and I feel they're very ignorant, they're very uninformed, they're uneducated. That's why we're doing this show, to these first 4 episodes, to explain the context of who you are, and that you're not actually looking for a fight. Do you think that the apostles were looking for a fight, or were they just looking to do their job? Paul writes, I just want to run this race. I just want to do it. And yet he was arrested. And yet Peter was also arrested. He was taken before the magistrates, before the Pharisees. Do you think he was looking for a fight with them, or was he just wanting to do his job and the fight came to him?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know me. I mean, I'm your father, and you know how many times I would intentionally do my best to avoid the trouble, avoid the fight. I just don't want to. Telling you the truth, I don't want to have anything to do with those people except, hey, you want to come and listen to the gospel, or if you're hungry, I'll feed you. Just leave me alone. And I said that to them literally hundreds of times at different meetings with mayor and multiple government officials and inspectors and law enforcement agencies. I would tell them, or parks departments, so many times, just please, you don't want to hear about Artur Pawlowski, just leave me alone. Just let me do my job. You got your job to do your job. Let me do my job. My job is to give those people a messages of hope, cheer them up, and feed them. And if you let me do my job, you will never have a fight with Artur Pawlowski. Let me do my job. And of course, as you know, that's a problem for them because my job is very successful. Put it this way, we are making an impact. Things are happening. A lot of people are being fed. The truth sets them free. And I guess that's a conflict of interest. And we have become too popular for the public to be ignored by the corrupted authorities. So they keep coming, they keep looking for ways to shut us down. And this is now 20 years in the making. 20 years of fighting those people on a regular basis. It's exhausting, it's crazy, it's very time consuming and very expensive. But going back to the story, why I call them Nazis, I call them by their proper pronouns. There is so much talk about pronouns these days. You know, you got to call people by their proper pronouns. So when I started to see for over a year, remember, for over a year, how they were acting, how they were behaving, what they were saying, to me, Polish immigrant that grew up behind the Iron Curtain was identical. The rhetorics, the ways that they were moving, dressing themselves for a war against the people was identical to what I saw under the boots of the Soviets. And of course, the stories I've heard from my grandparents and the older generation are teachers that remember the war. I had teachers that lived through the Second War. They were telling us things all the time. To me, that all looked like a repetition of history. So in order to communicate the message with the masses, the message that is so obvious to me, what I was seeing, well, I started to use rhetorics. I started to use words that would resonate with people, would shake them, would slap them in the face. What I was trying to do was to awaken them. And sometimes when the people are refusing to wake up, well, you got to slap them in the face. And those words, you Nazis, you
And
Gestapo.
and this is important because Jesus used certain words that when we read today without understanding cultural and historical context, it seems it doesn't have the punch that it originally actually had when they came out of Jesus's mouth, which was whitewashed tombs, you brood of vipers. Those were the most insulting things that you
Yeah,
could say to a Pharisee and a Sadducee and a magistrate, a people that were in charge as religious leaders in that day. There was nothing more insulting to
that's
say
right.
those kinds of words. And
Because they were
today,
unclean. Those words were implying that those people are unclean. And to be unclean in the Jewish culture was the worst thing.
So to say to someone today, you whitewashed tomb, it doesn't really make sense in the same way because one, we speak English, and two, we don't have the same purity laws. We don't have the same context of what those words actually meant back then. So he was using aggressive, violent words. They were punching them to their core. They were stirring things inside of them that made them angry. They were very insulting words. And people, Christians, need to understand that those words aren't just what they say on paper. There was context to those words, and they needed to be awakened. And here's a point that I've observed is there's two types of situations when you're dealing with this kind of unjust situation. One, you can appeal to the actual individuals doing it, the people taking orders, like the police officers, or at the Nazi time, it was the Nazis. You could appeal to those people. And in those situations, from what I've read, from what I understand, there's a book by Richard Wurmbrand, Tortured for Christ. How he would get to those individuals is through kindness, through love, which is what the Bible teaches. You get to them through the love of Christ, and eventually either those people will kill you for your kindness because it exposes their evil so much, or you might turn them. But there's another way, which is you appeal to the rest of the people. You appeal to the masses that need to understand that what these individuals are doing is so evil, and they need to be awakened by it. And that's what Jesus did when he called these Pharisees whitewashed tombs, you brood of vipers. He was telling the rest of the people around and the rest of the world that they are hypocrites, they are evil, and the rest of the people need to be awakened to that fact. Was he turning those Pharisees, those people that were persecuting him? No, just psychologically and just human speaking, when you confront someone and tell them, yeah, you're wrong, you're doing evil, for the most of the time, that person is going to double down. That person is going to justify what they're doing, and you just created a worse situation for that person, and they're not going to turn. That's what Richard Wurmbrand observed, and he was tortured in communism when there were people that were insulting these people and you're evil, you're bad. They would just justify it, and they would sleep fine at night. But when you did kindness to them, that's what turned. But when you're trying to appeal to people, and he also writes this in his book, when he was appealing to the rest of the American people who didn't understand how evil communism was, he was calling them names. He was saying these people are evil, these people are doing wicked things, they're demon possessed. And that's what you were doing. You were appealing to everybody else who needed a slap in the face to be woken up to the reality of what was happening. That we are leaning towards I would say, soft dictatorship, a soft tyranny, a soft communism, and we're going towards full communism, full socialism, full fascism. And people needed to be waking up to that fact. And again, there's every situation you need discernment, and you need to understand what is best for that situation. The Holy Spirit helps you do that. And in that case, the best thing to do was to awaken the rest of the world that we are not to stand for this, especially as the body of Christ. As Christians, you are to oppose this. And people need to understand that this is fascism. This is Nazism. And what they're doing is evil. They're shutting down churches. They're hypocrites. And really, they just hate God. And that's what you did that day. You told people what it was. And people need to understand that there's different approaches to different situations.
Yes. When I said Gestapo, people don't understand what the word means, and especially what the word means to the people like me, immigrants. Well, it means political police. So those agents of the Nazi party, the Gestapo, they were not looking to preserve or to keep law and order. Their job was to look for political dissidents, for anyone that would oppose the Nazi party, those that would preach the truth, those that were telling people, trying to awaken them about what the Nazi party was really all about. And that was my intention. I just wanted the world to hear and see that this is a repetition of history, that those people are doing all those evil things in an unlawful way. They were the real lawbreakers, and yet they were trying to portray us as the lawbreakers. So what they did, and eventually they came back with a vengeance, like you said. They found crooked judges. First judge that they were able to buy was David Gates. And I don't know if David Gates is related to the devil Bill Gates, but David Gates of Alberta gave them the power to enter our church with whomever they wanted to come and anytime they wished. So they came with anti terrorists. It's quite fascinating because after signing this document, he resigned. So my
So
wife,
for those who want to understand a little bit more, he issued a court order. He's one of the highest judges, a chief associate judge
no,
of
no,
for
no,
the
that's David
entire.
Gates. That's David Gates.
Yeah,
He was a regular judge. You were talking about
John Rook.
John Rook.
Yeah.
That's
So
later.
John, what Rook did was he signed a court order that allowed any Albertan any Albertan to be subjected to the mandates, and basically created it in legalese that he gave the authority to anybody when it comes to the administration, when it comes to AHS, Alberta Health Services, when it comes to the police services, local and federal, RCMP. He gave them blanket authority over all Albertans. And what David Gates did is similar, but a little bit different, is he allowed also everybody to be basically, he gave them more authority so that the police could come in with as many troops as they wanted, with as much force as they wanted, and he gave them the authority to make arrests.
Yeah, so the first judge was David Gates. He gives them the power contrary to the criminal code of Canada, contrary to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And they show up with anti terrorists, but they also were able to secure another judge, which is the boss of judges, just like you said, John Rook, the crook, as I call him. And he gave them the actual power to arrest anyone that would oppose the mandates, health inspectors and law enforcement agencies. And they came armed with that. They showed up with anti terrorists. I remember that we stood at the door and we just simply told them, "You're not allowed to enter. You will not enter." And another thing that is very important is at that time we were very popular, and the fight was global. The people were paying attention to what was going on. We had a standing room only in the church. It was packed to capacity. Also, people need to understand we were live streaming our event, so we were not hiding. We were not pretending that we don't exist. Actually, I call this the head on collision with the enemy, where you are openly saying, "No, I will not bow," just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where the whole world did bow, where all the nations bowed before the golden image of the Nebuchadnezzar. Those men, which were high officials in the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refused. They said no, and of course, the story has become one of the most extraordinary stories in the Bible, where the king gives them a second chance, do the right thing and bow, and they said no. And if God is perfectly able to rescue us from this pickle. If he chooses not to, it's fine. And off they went to the fire. And quite often I tell the people, because God gave me that revelation, that it's in the fire that Jesus shows up. So if you want to have an encounter with the living God, he shows up in the fire. Also, he sets you free. They were bound, thrown into the fire. But when Jesus shows up, he sets you free. Also, at the same time, he deals with your enemies. The people that did throw the men into the fire died first. Also, in the fire, you have a testimony. And I think that's what the word was looking for. That's what the word was waiting for, a testimony of a David, and nobody that, and nobody in the eyes of men, but as somebody in the eyes of God, the fight between David and Goliath. And that's exactly what happened. Those people had unlimited resources. They still have seemingly unlimited resources, and the fight continues. I'm still in court, as you know. We're still fighting. I was just yesterday hammered with $17,000 penalty by a judge. $17,000. The 1st of October, I have to come with that check no matter what. So the story
And
continues.
and and I wanna explain this to people. This isn't your fight. This isn't just your fight. Obviously, you're the person who has to fetch the bill, who has to appear in court, who's dealing with all of this, but you're representing all of Canadians because everything that happens in court is a precedent, is
Yeah,
something that will affect them, whether they understand that or not, or whether they care or not. What you do in court affects everybody, every Christian, certainly, and every Canadian that actually values and cares about freedom. Because if you
yeah,
know anything about history, the freedom of religion is one of the first to go. It's
yes.
always speech, press, it's always association, it's always protest, and religion is usually the first or second to go because that's just the playbook of tyrants.
Historically is always first. Freedom of religion goes first.
So you're not just representing yourself. You didn't ask for the fight. The fight came to you, and I'm gonna address people that are watching. This is your fight. They came after you. Yeah, they came after my dad. He's the one that's in court, but they came after you because it could have been you. And there, as that famous saying goes that I repeat often, first they came for the Jews, then they came for the workers, then they came for this people, then they came for that people, and then they came for me, and there was no one left to fight for me. That's just how it works. And your job as Christians, it's on you to support other Christians. There's that famous verse in the Bible that says that when one member of the body hurts, we all hurt. When one person suffers, we all suffer. And whether that's a Christian that's being tortured under communism, or whether that's on your backyard, in your backyard, on your front porch, there's a Christian right now that needs your help because he's in court. And that's part of your fight. Your fight is also to help other people fight. That can be your testimony that you helped other people to actually engage in the fight more because you, as you know, and this is a metaphor, but you can't fight without bullets. When the Nazis invaded Great Britain, they needed women and sometimes even young children to actually be in factories producing ammunition and producing planes because they needed them. They needed the equipment, they needed the means to fight. And it's the same way with this. And it's this, we're on a different battlefront. We're on engaging in the courts. We're fighting for our constitution. We're fighting for our charter of rights. We're fighting for our freedom as Christians to just do what we're trying to do as Christians. And this is all still the same fight from COVID, that a man who stood up against it is still in court as of right now, fighting against that. And you can be a part of that. You can help out. There's different ways to help, and it's on screen. And that can be part of your testimony to actually help somebody who's spent his whole life fighting.
Yeah, well, it's not an easy fight. You can be the best warrior on earth, unbeatable army, but without the supplies, you're going to quickly die. I mean, without the support of the nation, support of the people, communities, I don't care how great of a fighter you are. You need to eat. You need to pay the bills. If that is cut off, you're going to be destroyed. And they count on it. You have to understand. I got a whole legal team that is assisting us. And at the very beginning, they told me up front, they said, listen, I'm telling you that the tactic of the government is going to destroy you financially. That will be the tactic of the government. They're going to be stalling. They're going to be opposing us. They're going to be throwing stuff. They're going to try their best to bring you to court as many times as possible because every time a lawyer has to appear, it's thousands of dollars, preparation, documents. They will do everything in their power to bleed you out. The process is the punishment. That's what they're counting on. They're counting on you saying in the middle of the ring, in the middle of the fight, saying, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I have no more resources. I have no more support. It's over. So they're counting on it. And you have to understand how the system works. Totalitarian system always works the same way. They will try to scare you. They will try to bribe you. If those things will not work, they will try to destroy you financially. Always the same pattern, always the same way, copy paste. That's their game. So going back to Adam, to David Gates and John Rook, they came equipped with those documents, and we refused to bow before those crooked judges. And stepping out of the church, we entered the car. It was Dave Hughes and my brother David. As you remember, you guys already went home because the police left. We thought, okay, they're going to try something else. No one expected them waiting in ambush like
So I
wolves.
remember, I remember I was there and I was at the top of the stairs. The police came to the door. There was a huge opposition. The police were not allowed in because a bunch of parishioners stood there and said, "No, you are not allowed in. You do not have a warrant." And again, they said, "No, we're in the middle. You were in the middle of preaching." And the police
Yeah.
came that day again to disrupt, again to break the Criminal Code of Canada, Section 176, in violation of that law, and came in the name of the law, violating the law. And they dropped
Yes.
a piece of paper that day. They dropped a little piece of paper in a baggie that was folded up and crumpled, and they dropped it at the door, and then they left.
Yes.
And that, of course, was a very dangerous crumpled up document that we didn't know until later, but we didn't even look at it. We didn't even know what it was, and we drove home. They left and church finished, and we all just went home. I went home and you went in a different vehicle, and you also were driving home.
Yes. So what happened was we were stopped in the middle of the highway by anti-terrorists. I mean, there was so many police vehicles, and an officer came to the window. Dave Hughes was driving. I was sitting on the right. David, your uncle, my brother, was behind, and he looked at me and says, "You're under arrest. There is a warrant for your arrest." He turned to David. He said, "You're also under arrest." And we were asked to step out of the vehicle. So we were arrested and charged with the most ridiculous charges that I've ever heard in Canada. I mean, I remember the same charges behind the Iron Curtain. So what were the charges? Inciting people to come to an illegal gathering. They call it illegal gathering. Also, officiating an illegal gathering and participating in illegal gathering. So we were wrapped up. I was on my knees.
And
They
illegal
carried.
gathering, illegal gathering was in quotes, and it actually equaled church service.
Yes, yeah. Well, of course, all my troubles were always associated with me doing my job in the capacity of a clergy. So we were wrapped up. I was pushed around, shoved, placed in a police vehicle, upside down, head down, feet up. There was crazy things going on. My feet were not fitting inside the police van because it was a small one, and I remember those two officers are pushing, and I'm just not fitting. I'm a big guy, and my head is on the ground and my feet are sticking out, and they said we're going to charge him with assaulting a police officer and kicking us. So they were making stuff up. They hated me so much that truth didn't matter. And eventually, with my help, we were able to put my feet inside the vehicle, and that's how I was taken to prison, laying down upside down, feet in air, by the roof, my head on the ground. They stopped in the middle of downtown and they had coffee, and the police officers were coming, looking at this scene of me on the ground with my full body on the on my wrists, handcuffed. I had a scar, like someone would take a knife and cut it all around it for over a month. It was brutal. It was very painful. They were laughing. They would look at the window one after another and just had such a blast. It was such a big joke to them. I was taken to prison with David. We spent 3 days and 2 nights on concrete. Every half hour, police would come and bang on the doors. Bright lights, like you can't imagine. You can't see a thing. Even if you close your eyes, you still see light. That's how bright it is. So you can't sleep, you can't function. It was bad. Eventually we were shackled like animals, the penguin march, I call it, and we were taken to see another crooked judge. I remember when we were taken Monday to see Adam Germain, that's his name, another crooked judge in the province of Alberta. Adam Germain started the proceedings, so we're shackled like animals, standing there, for having a church service. That's the crime. And he started the proceedings with quoting CBC and CNN about the pandemic, about masks, about this and that. And I turned to David and I said, "This is not the judge. This is a propagandist. He is working for CNN. This guy is not the judge. This is not the real judge. He's a political activist
So
working
he
for the government."
basically started, this is a bail hearing. You are just in prison. It's a bail hearing. And he starts the proceeding by saying, we are in the greatest pandemic ever.
Yeah.
We are experiencing this, and masks and social distancing. It's all to save lives, and it's just the world's at a standstill, and it's just blah 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 blah.
Yeah, that's exactly how it was. And I knew, I said to David, we don't stand a chance. This guy is bought and paid for by the government. He is not looking at the merits of the case. He is not interested at actually what happened. He's not interested in the legality of things, the law. The case is already decided. And it was then when we were taken back to prison, when David moved towards me and he says, "Art, what are you going to do now?" And because David knows that my brain works strategically like chess, so I see pieces sometimes and I'm strategizing, what is the next move, what should we do? And I took a step back and I remember, and I said, "David, I have no idea. I've never seen a corruption at this level. I mean, lawlessness. This is not law, this is lawlessness. I don't know. Maybe I need to take a step back." And that's exactly what I did. I took a step back and God spoke to me. And he says, "That's exactly what I want you to do. I want you to take a step back. I will deal with this issue. You go to the States and share your story." And that's where the decision was made to go with you on a
And
tour.
this was also coupled with the fact that arrest. So a couple weeks before, you go viral for the video. You kicked out the police. You called them Nazis. You go viral for this. Then you're arrested basically for that incident. A couple weeks later, and that video goes viral, almost just as viral. This is the famous picture. This is actually what the front cover of your book, Lions Do Not Bow, is, which is you on the highway with your hands behind your back and you're in the middle of the rain, dragged across the highway with all these police officers with their blue masks on. And of course, David was also arrested with you. He was basically carried out. He's a big guy. He was carried out on the highway by three officers. Two or three officers had to carry him, and you were dragged. And this dramatic arrest that also goes viral, and then you're in jail, and then you decide you need to go share with the rest of the world your story and what's going on in Canada, and to warn people. And that's what you did next. You went to the US.
Yeah, I believe that what God wanted to do is God wanted to awaken the American people. I mean, at that time, America was under totalitarianism as well. We have to remember that it was a global attack. The same thing were happening to the American people. I think a lot of American people had no clue what's really is going on, and I think that God wanted to use us to kind of awaken them, and that's where the tour started. And the reception was phenomenal. As you remember, we were traveling all over United States. I think I boarded 80, 100 planes during that time. I spoke hundreds of times in different venues, different events, sometimes two, three times a day. A Republican Party educating people about communism and socialism. I was at the Reawaken America tour with Trump family, with General Flynn, with Mike Lindell. I mean, the heroes of the American people, with Harmon. And Tom Harmon right now is the Homeland Security Director. Well, I had a dinner with him and I was on a panel of discussion with that man talking about totalitarianism. What is happening? And American people thought that the greatest attack was coming from the southern border. While here was a Canadian that was telling them, listen, your biggest enemy is at the northern border because the China has been taken over Canada. And it was remarkable. The reception was unbelievable. As you remember, 10, 15,000 people would come to the events, and we were busy traveling from state to state, and New York, California, you name it, Texas. We were everywhere sharing the story, doing our best to awaken the people, but also, which I quite often repeat to the people, the story of Art Pawlowski, the story of Pawlowski's family is not look what the horrible things were done to them, look what the enemy did to them. That's not the story. The story is look what the enemy did to them, uh, but look what the mighty things the Lord has done. Not what the enemy did. God used the enemy to elevate the message. That's the story. The story is that we were attacked, and the people needed to hear what was really going on from a credible source, from an immigrant that grew up behind the Iron Curtain. Once, Nathaniel, I asked God, why do they hate me so much? I don't get it. I was the first to be arrested during the truck convoy. And as you know, I don't have the rig. We don't have a big truck. I don't have farming equipment. And they decided to arrest a pastor, a clergy, a week before they started to arrest the farmers and the truckers. It just didn't make any sense. So I asked God, why do they hate me so much? Why they are so terrified of me? And here is what it clicked into my brain. I realized that they are afraid of me and the story because I saw this movie before, and I'm telling people we have to change the script or else. But I also saw the remedy, the solidarity movement. So the message is not poor me, look what they've done to me. No, no. The message is they've attacked us, but here is what we need to do.
So
And
you're saying one of the reasons that they hate and fear you so much is because one, you know exactly what communism looks like. You lived through it. You see the red flags, you see the signs, and you can warn people about it. And you also saw the very movement that collapsed communism, that actually beat communism. And it was peaceful, and it was with God. It was a godly movement that had Christ at the center of it. People took up crosses, and they brought the word of God, and they prayed, and they went to their knees, and you saw all of that. So those two things is why they might fear you and why they hate you so much.
yes, yes, because it's easy to point at the trouble, at the problem, but if you don't have the solutions, well, the problem remains. I know the solution, and I have been, as you remember, like a broken record, repeating the solution over and over again. Well, give me enough Canadians, and I will give you back your liberty and your prosperity. They don't have enough police officers. There's more of us. We, the people, we are the power. They think they have the power, but the truth is, the reality is that when the people will come and say enough is enough, it's over for the tyrants. There's only few tyrants, there's millions of us. The story ends when we rise up and a new story begins. That's the solution, and the solution is very straightforward. So we went to the States, we did our best. We received a great reception, as you know, and then it was a time to come back. And I knew I'm going to be arrested again because the
Sorry,
prophets
but
were
before
telling me.
before this, you did something before you left, and this was actually the charge that you're about to talk about. I know what you're getting to, but before that, before you left, you did something. You did something with at an event, at a baptism, and what was that?
Which event?
Well, you were arrested. What you're about to talk about is the tarmac event, but that charge was actually for baptizing someone.
Well, you're talking about Adam Germain. Well, we were arrested for keeping the church's doors open, inciting people, participating, officiating, but we kept doing our job. So even though we decided to go to the States for the tour, in the meantime, We just kept doing the same thing. So what we did, we fed the poor, and we kept the church's doors open, and
But
we
what I'm
kept.
trying to get at is you baptized my sister, your
Yeah, I know,
daughter.
I know. I'm getting there. So we kept doing the same thing, and during the summer, we always baptize people. And your sister Maya came to me, and she said that for my birthday, as a gift, I would like you to baptize me in the river. That's what she said, which was like, wow. I didn't ask her. We didn't talk about this. She just came on her own, and she asked for her birthday to be baptized. And of course, it doesn't matter how many soldiers they will have with machine guns pointed at me, I would still do it no matter what. And I baptized Maya, and I baptized a few other people. I kept baptizing people every week, as you remember, no matter what. It was in a public river, it was in a public park, outdoor event. And um, I didn't know that later on they're going to use all of those things to charge me with criminal offenses. But I didn't know. When we were in the States, we didn't know, because I called my lawyers on a regular basis, and I asked them, is there anything happening? Or is there anything I should know? I'm coming back no matter what. I am planning to come back. I was offered to move to the States. I was offered to stay in the States, but I knew that God wanted me to come back, that's my job was to fight for Canada and go back and forth to United States. But my job, my headquarters, if you will, is here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. So I called from Montana. I was about to board a plane, and I said, is there anything I should know? Sarah Miller was the lawyer at that time, and she says, no, there is no warrants, there's nothing going on. And we've called, when you board a plane, you have to send them a manifest, who is boarding the plane and who is going to be flying and what we have. And I remember the pilot was calling the authorities, and he said, well, I'm bringing Artur Pawlowski to Calgary, and they asked if I'm vaccinated. And he asked me and says, are you vaccinated? I said, no. Well, do you have the test, the COVID test? They asked him to ask me. He says, do you have it? I said, no. And there is a pause, and he says, they put me on hold, and that was a very long hold. I think a half hour, 20 minutes. It was a long time. I guess they were talking with each other, with authorities and law enforcement agencies, what they are to do, because at that time you had to be quarantined for 14 days, and you had to have the job, and you have to have the test, and all those craziness. And I didn't have any of those things. Well, they said, come, no problems. And I knew at that moment, I knew they really, really wanted me back in Canada. My wife, your mom, I remember I was talking to her on the phone, and she said, what you have done, you escaped their claws, and they are so mad at you. They are so angry because they cannot hurt you, because you're in a state. You escape their claws, and they are filled with this hatred, like a dog with the rabies. That's what they were. So they really wanted me to come back, and all those other things that the whole thing was supposed to be all about. It didn't matter. Just come back. All good. So I boarded the plane. I knew something is cooking, but we didn't know. And when we arrived in Calgary, the plane was reverted to, to multiple, how you call them, the
Lanes.
lanes, and we were directed to go to a customs building, and where custom officers were waiting for me, for all of us. And I asked the pilot, "Is there anything unusual about this?" He says, "No, everything looks normal to me." The police was not there. Later on, we find out that they were all hiding. The vehicles were behind in such a way that no one could see them. The officers were literally like gangsters hiding in the customs building. And they came out all muzzled, and they said, "You're under arrest. There are two warrants for your arrest." They activated the warrants when I was in air. When we crossed the border in air, they've activated two warrants for my arrest. and I was arrested on my knees, taken to the customs building. I was told that I am criminally charged this time for the same charges, but criminal: officiating an illegal gathering, participating in illegal gathering, inciting people to come to an illegal gathering, plus organizing church events where I baptize your daughter, your sister, Maya, daughter, and criminally charged for not wearing a muzzle, even though I have medical exemption. I was taken to the customs building by the customs officers, taken and given to the authority of the Calgary police. And I remember other officers, I think they were customs, I don't know. There were so many police officers in the building. They already had my luggage. And I remember I look at them, and there was number of those people going through my clothes already. They were like they were like hyenas going through stuff. I don't know what those people were thinking. I don't know if they were thinking I was smuggling Donald J. Trump into Canada to liberate us. I don't know if they were thinking that I'm smuggling tons of money. I just have no clue what they were thinking, but they look at me and they said, "We will look everywhere." And they give me this evil look and the pointing finger, "Well, look everywhere." And I start laughing because, of course, I was not smuggling anything into Canada. I didn't have anything illegal to bring. I just showed up. There was a lots of dirty clothes after my tour because I didn't want to wash anything. For the final tour, I just used everything I had, and I knew I'm coming back. And I was taken to police, locked again in the solitary on concrete with those bright lights, and I know that there were hundreds of people waiting for me, including you and others on the other side of the fence. But you were not told. I was supposed to arrive at a different place. They diverted the plane to a different place. They kept you in the dark. They lied to you. And then eventually you find out that I was already detained, arrested by the Calgary police, and taken to jail. Another funny part of the story, which was not very funny at that time, was that the police confiscated all of my belongings, including my laptop, including all of the stuff I had, and they said they don't have it. When I was eventually released on bail again, I asked for my stuff, and they said, "Oh, we don't have it. We don't know where it is." Like, what do you mean? You arrested me. I saw you going through my stuff, and you don't know where it is. And thank God, I think they would never return that stuff to me if it was not for a reporter that recorded the Calgary finest putting my stuff into the police cruiser. So they lied to us that they don't have it, but the recording showed that they stole my stuff. They broke into my laptop illegally without the judge's warrant. And by the way, if it comes to the judges, all of their secret meetings were done ex parte. What that means is that we were not notified. The public was not allowed to participate. We couldn't defend ourselves, even though they were deciding about our rights, our freedoms, and our lives. We were not allowed to come and counterattack this illegal attack on our lives. It was all done in secret by the government officials and the crooked judges like David Gates, Adam Germain, John Rook the Crook, and a few others. So finally, days later, we were able to retrieve our belongings because of the video. And I find out that they broke into my computer. I don't know what they were looking for. I mean, as you know, I have hundreds of sermons, preparation for sermons, all different stories for my teachings. So I hope that some of those officers reading my material will be saved. And of course, lots of pictures and videos. I had to buy a new computer because I don't know if they planted something inside. Maybe they put some illegal thing into my computer, and then they will say, "Hey, he has this on his computer." So I couldn't trust my computer, and it cost me $5,000 to get a new one. But eventually, as you know, when I was still in the States with Adam Germain, that's a very important story because I asked my lawyers to talk to the judge. So when before sentencing, before the verdict, you have a right to address the judge. And I remember I did it. And I basically said, Judge, if I'm guilty, if you find me guilty for keeping the church's doors open, then you have to find the premier and his ministers guilty as well. Because I remember the same people that implemented those illegal mandates and restrictions or us were caught red handed partying, drinking, no social distancing, no masks, no nothing. The very people that implemented the mandates on us were not keeping them themselves. They're hypocrites, they're liars. So I said to the judge, if I'm guilty, if my brother David is guilty, then I guess we're going to share ourselves with the premier, Jason Kenney, and his cabinet ministers because they are guilty as well. And actually, they're guilty of a worse crime, in quote, because they had drinking party with Emerson's whiskey. We did save lives, they just partied. And of course, the judge turned red and he says, that's ridiculous. My comments are this and that, whatever. And then, as you remember, he found us guilty on everything, and he gave us this compelled speech order straight from North Korea, straight from China, Soviet Russia. Basically, the court order stated that every time we talk to another human being, every time we do interviews, every time I preach in the church, I must, by the court order, or I will go to prison for the contempt of court, I must recite a government approved script regarding COVID-19 and mandates and vaccines and masks and all that craziness. And I
So
remember,
part of your sentence, because this is one of the craziest things I think that's ever been done in a court, certainly in Alberta, and that is that part of your sentence, you were found guilty for that whole highway arrest, for those charges, you were found guilty. And part of the sentencing by this judge was that every time you spoke about COVID or masks or vaccines or social distancing to anybody in public ever, you had to say essentially that it was a pre typed little blurb that you had to speak, you had to recite every single time you talked about it. And essentially, it said that these are only my opinions. It's not backed by any science or government mandates, and that it's only my opinion, and it's most likely not true. Basically, that's what it was saying. And you had to read that little blurb every single time that you would speak about the topic of COVID. That was his sentence. That was part of his sentence. That every time you spoke about, he was mandating you that
yeah,
whenever you spoke about this topic, you must say what I tell you to.
yes, which of course is completely illegal. And I remember listening to his sentencing, to his judgment. He pretty much said time served for the time we spent in jail. He was not prepared to send me back to prison. He said, I'm not going to turn you into a martyr, and blah
I
blah blah.
remember
But you
that
must.
was an important quote. I remember he said that. He says, "I don't want to turn you into a martyr." And of course, other judges did turn you into a martyr. But that was fascinating that he said that. And again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. His hatred of you blinded him of all logic, reason, the law, everything. He was so blinded by his hatred for you. He ranted, because I was listening the entire time to his judgment. He ranted for like
Yeah,
40 minutes. He ranted about your speaking tour in the US. He was
yeah,
complaining that you were meeting with politicians and media personalities and influencers, and that you were meeting with these people and speaking. He was ranting for 40. I didn't hear a single ounce of law. I didn't hear anything about precedent or anything related to actual law. He was ranting that he just didn't like you and he disapproved of you, your temperament, your character. He just hated you.
yeah.
And we were
Like
listening to that like, where's the law?
Yeah, like a 5-year-old kid, a schoolgirl that was, having her moments. But I remember listening to this, and I turned to the reporters and I said, well, I guess I'm going to prison. I grabbed the microphone and I said, Judge, I hope you're listening to me, because I want you to know that I will never ever obey your order. And I mean, for the contempt of court, it's 6 months prison. And if you want to arrest me and send you sheriffs, I'm not running away, I'm not hiding, but I will never obey your order. I am a pastor and I'm called to preach the truth, and I refuse to lie to the people. And that's it. I remember your uncle grabbed the microphone as well and says, "Well, Judge, I hope you're listening to me." And he said, "You can take your order and you can shove it where the sun doesn't shine." And I remember turning to him and saying, like, David, I did my best to say to the judge, in a more diplomatic way, I think you just finished us off. I think we're going to be handcuffed and taken to prison. That didn't happen, and of course, we never obeyed his order, and it was overturned later on appeal, and we're completely vindicated. We had like $40,000 penalties to pay to the Nazis, and all those
It
different
took it
penalties.
took I don't want to exaggerate, but I think it only took like a week tops for the Court of Appeal to look at that order and say, this is ridiculous. Even by our standards, our weak constitutional standards when it comes to our free speech in Canada, even by their standards, this was insane, and they didn't even enforce it. And within a week, that part of the sentence was immediately overturned, a week or two. And the rest of it eventually was overturned too, because just the whole order was so unlawful. It was so illegal. And even the Court of Appeals acknowledged that this was not based in law. This was not based on
Well,
precedent.
they were good judges. Later on, it turned out that I have become too popular, too famous, and they needed to make an example out of me. So this was 2020 and 2021. In and out of jail, in and out of courts. During that time, I think I received about 40 citations in and out of lawyers' offices and courts and fights. That time I was traveling all over Canada, as you remember, organizing church services at the Supreme Court in British Columbia, in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, doing rallies, marches, protests. And then, beginning of 2022, I got a phone call, and I was asked to become part of the truck convoy. They asked me if I would become their clergy, their pastor, and they asked me if I would be willing to organize church services. Of course, they didn't have to ask. It was a great privilege for me. It was a great honor. To this day, I consider this the greatest honor that was given to me, to be able to be part of the truck convoy, the greatest uprising civil rights movement in the history of Canada. It was incredible. It was amazing. We did church services, a number of them in Calgary. They went to Ottawa. I was supposed to join them in Ottawa, but at that time, Nathaniel, I don't know if you remember, we had 15, 20,000 people marching every week. I was doing rallies in Okotoks, High River, other places, traveling back and forth. So many things were happening, having church services, feeding the poor. I had my hands full. We've decided that we're going to stay behind and keep organizing the support for the truckers in Ottawa. So they went to Ottawa. We were holding the fort, if you will. And then I got a phone call from someone from Milk River and Coutts, and they said, Pastor, people are getting really depressed. What happened? One leg of the truck convoy went to Coutts. Coutts is a point of entry between Montana and Alberta, and they've decided to hold a resistance in Milk River, which is about 14 kilometers from Coutts, and in Coutts as well. So they this man called me and he said, the people are getting depressed. There are police officers dressed in black with machine guns pointing at their children, playing street hockey. It's very depressing. Can you come and cheer us up? Can you do church services? So I went with you, and we took worshiper Larry. We took the speakers. We took some food. We raised some money for the gasoline for the truckers in Milk River in Coutts, and we arrived there. As you remember, there was a blockade done by RCMP officers, which is like American FBI, Canadian version of FBI. Here, it's a federal police. They blocked the streets, and I did the church service. We had Lord's Supper. We were singing hymns in Milk River. And then we went to talk to the RCMP, and we asked them if they would open the barricade so we can go to Coutts to do another church service for the hurting people there. So what did we see in Milk River and in Coutts? Here's what I saw. I saw hurting people that came in solidarity with each other. A color didn't matter, background didn't matter, their traditions didn't matter. Young and old, they brought their cats, their dogs, their horses. They were feeding each other, loving each other. They were singing hymns, they were crying, they were praying. Someone was bringing fire. It was minus 30. It was very cold. It was incredible. This was Canada. This was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen on Canadian soil. This solidarity, this unity among the people. Nothing mattered. What mattered was freedom, freedom for their children, freedom for the future of this country. And the same thing was in Quds. So we did another church service in Quds. And let me just say this to the people that are watching. When we went over there, the roads were open. When we came back after we did the church services, the roads were still open. We not once advocated for the closure of the roads. So here's what I said during my 19-minute sermon um, to the packed house in Smuggler's Saloon in Quds. Well, I basically told them to stand for God and state given rights. I told them to hold the line. I reminded them about history, the tyranny, solidarity movement. I had a hoodie that said solidarity movement and with God we win on the back. We went to our knees. I prayed for people. We had Lord's Supper. We were singing hymns. We had a dinner together. I told them to stand up if they don't want to do it for themselves, to do it for their children. The children, Canadian children, are worth fighting for. They don't have enough police to shut down the entire nation. There's more of us. I told them that we need to do this peacefully, the solidarity style, no
And
guns, no
and so
swords.
people understand. This was when our leader, the supreme leader, Justin Trudeau, told everybody that if you do not get vaccinated, you will not be allowed on trains, planes, public transportation. If you are banned from school, that's okay. It's just that's your consequence that you're facing. If you are denied medical attention, that's your consequence for your actions. This is the rhetoric that was coming from our politicians that if you do not comply to what we tell you to, you are going to be denied basic rights,
Yes.
basic human dignity, your work, your livelihood, your school, your entertainment, your every aspect of your life basically would become a consequence of your decision not to bend to what the government said. This is what we were dealing with, and it was coming to a breaking point, and these people were really hurting. People were losing their livelihoods, their businesses. They were coming out of school. Some people were denied medical attention because they would not get the vaccine. All this stuff was happening, and people had
People were
enough.
dying. Listen, people were dying because what the government was doing. Suicide went out of the roof. Fentanyl abuse. You know, it was absolutely craziness. It was the darkest moment in our history. People needed messages of hope. They needed they needed to hear something positive that can get them out of this horror movie, because that's exactly what it was. And I decided to remind them about history, and I told them we can paralyze their entire system by a general strike, just like the solidarity movement did. That we don't need guns and swords. That we are the power. We the people. We hold the actual power. And that was it. People, it resonated with the people. They liked it, as you remember. And we uploaded the video and went home. No one stopped us. There were police there. I saw undercover police inside. Not a big deal. I had nothing to hide. Everything we were doing was perfectly legal in Milk River, in Coutts, during protests. Everything was legal. We have a provision in our constitution under the Charter of Rights of Freedoms, a freedom of peaceful assembly. We have a freedom of religion. We have freedom of expression. We have freedom of press and other forms of communication. All of those things, the government decided to take away from us, and we truly started to live behind the Iron Curtain under the boots of a totalitarian regime, under the leadership of the Liberal Party, Conservative Party. Because you got to remember, it was the Conservative Party that did this to us in the province of Alberta, in the province of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, in the province of Ontario. It was not the Liberal government only, it was all the Uni Party, NDP, Conservative, and the Liberals that did this to us. The Conservative Party arrested more people than the Liberal Party in federal. I mean, it's crazy. People don't remember the story. Maybe they don't want to remember the story. Maybe they don't want to know. However, we went home, no big deal. Another speech, peaceful. And then Saturday, we did another big rally, 20,000 people, another church service. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I did another protest, another rally in, I think it was High River. And then Tuesday morning, I stepped out of the house. I didn't know at that time that we were being monitored by undercover police. I stepped out of the house. I was arrested by every force in the land. There were detectives, RCMP, Calgary police, undercover, anti-terrorists. They were a SWAT team. Everyone was there. It was crazy. They blocked the street. I was arrested, interrogated for hours, and then I was placed in prison, stripped naked, solitary confinement, and I was charged with criminal charges, inciting people, a mischief over 5,000, and terrorism. They actually charged me with terrorism for interfering with the crucial infrastructure under the Defense Act. And off I went to prison. I was locked over there, and when I was in prison, they piled other charges. They started to bring other charges, and they were piling up, trying to bury me in prison. As you remember, the next day I got a shock because I was kept in metal cages for no reason. Metal cages no bigger than a man sitting. To this day, we do not know why they've decided to keep a pastor in a metal cage. Two actually, and one after another. My write ups were confiscated. I decided to write the story. My Bibles were confiscated. I was denied my human rights. I was denied my religious rights. And I was kept in solitary confinement. And overall, I spent 50 days in prison. And during that time, I wrote the book, Lions Do Not Bow, because I wanted to document the story while it was still fresh, while I remember the details. And believe it or not, the book, my manuscript, was confiscated by the Canadian government three times. It scared them, me writing it up. And we demanded this to be returned to us. Eventually, they did. Um, my lawyer smuggled a big portion of the manuscript because we were afraid they're going to destroy it, they're going to take it away. And she was able to smuggle it out of jail, and later on we send it to the American publishers, and the book is here. The book was, of course, as you remember, blocked by the Canadian government for a month and a half, trying to destroy our sales, trying to destroy the story from coming out. What they are afraid of? Well, I'm including everything in the story. The background, the get out video, what happened in the courts, the rallies, the speeches, the tour. I'm including
Names.
the names of the judges, the names of the players, the names of the politicians, the collusion, the bribery, attempted bribery by the Canadian government. I was offered money. I was offered a guaranteed seat at the legislature. I was offered a government job. I was
The drugs that occur in prison, the abuse in the prison system.
That's right. They are offering five different highly addictive narcotics to the inmates every single day, in the morning and in the evening, twice a day.
And as well, you document some fascinating stories that exposes a lot of abuse and corruption that happens within the prison system. And we're going to speed run through your 50 days in prison, just very, very general, explain to people kind of what happened over those 50 days. But very briefly, because we've been talking for a long time and there's so much to cover in that 50 days in prison, most of which was in solitary confinement, which is, as you know, illegal or unwarranted under the Geneva Convention because it's considered torture. Anything over 14 days in solitary confinement is considered tortured under the Geneva Convention. You were held for 40 some days in solitary confinement. And of course, you were abused in many different ways within the prison system, but just give a general overview of what happened if people want the details and the fascinating stories and the incredible impact that you had on people, both guards and inmates within the prison that you had. You were preaching between the cracks in the metal door to inmates. You were praying for people, praying for healing for people. One man whose leg was healed when you prayed for it. All these amazing, incredible stories that are documented, people can find in your book, Lions Do Not Bow. You can find it on Amazon or on pathwayservices.com. You can go there, you can order it, and you can learn all the background information. And at the same time, you can be supporting someone who's fighting and in the court system and really standing for you, not just for himself, but for God, for Christianity, and for the nation of Canada. We love the rule of law and we love our nation. We care about our rights and freedoms. We care about our history. We care about our foundation. And as you know, you're fighting for that, and people can help by purchasing this book, by spreading the knowledge, the information, and of course for supporting financially, because you can't win without the support and the supplies. So people can go to Amazon or amazon.ca or amazon.com or pathwayservices.com to order the book, and they will be able to read and understand and see the full picture of everything that went on. It's fascinating. It reads very well, and people can learn a lot and be entertained as well, and help out at the same time. So if you want to, you can go to purchase the book Lions Do Not Bow. But right now, just give us a very brief overview of that time in prison.
Well, a lots of things happen in prison, but I want to just let the people know about the attempt by the government and the mainstream media to literally murder us and destroy us, because it's very important for people to know that this was not just a pure harassment, tickets and courts and arrests. They really wanted to kill us. They lit our house on fire in the middle of the night, and that's a very important story because of what the
So
politicians
I
were
can I
saying.
can I can give a little bit of insight into that. And again, it's all written in the book. So if you want all the details and the fascinating stories, you can read it in the book for yourselves. But I remember we're at home, I'm taking a shower, and I hear some commotion, and I wrap myself in my towel, and I look out the window and I see sirens and police and so many lights, and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I think they've come to arrest my dad again." And I run, I put some clothes on, I run outside, and I did see police, and I was a little bit worried that they've come to arrest again. But I look outside and I see smoke, and I'm like, oh, I think the neighbor's house is on fire. And I go to the backyard, and lo and behold, I see that our garage is on fire, and there's so much smoke, and the firefighters were already there. None of us had any clue what was going on. We were all inside. I was taking a shower. Siblings were in their rooms, probably ready to go to sleep.
Well, it was
We
about 12 at night, right? So I think they were
Yeah, it
already
was it was nighttime. We were all ready to go to bed, and we look, and there's smoke coming from our garage. The firefighters were already there. We had no idea about what was happening. They were already there putting out the fire. And we come, and of course it's all recorded, and there's pictures, and there's pictures of it in the book as well. If you want to take a look at that, you can look at it in the book. But yeah, somebody, and this is, I blame the media and the politicians for inciting hatred
yeah.
towards this pastor and his family, and someone tried to kill us. I mean, it was not a summertime heat season where fires just come up blazing. This was winter. It was still winter at this time, and they tried to light us on fire.
Yeah. So the firefighter chief came to me and said that they had a very similar situation when the garage got fire, and within 5 minutes the whole house burned to the ground. And he says, "You're extremely lucky because we caught this. Your neighbor called us right away, and we caught this very early because if there was few more minutes, your house with you in it would be burnt to the ground. Also, it's very important for people to understand what the government did, politicians and the media, by portraying us as criminals and terrorists. They lit our church on fire. I don't know if you remember that. They burned down our children's bus. They tried to burn down the church. It did not succeed. The dirt burned the children's bus, but they didn't succeed to burn down the church. They also broke into the church multiple times, stole our
Smashed
equipment.
windows. They put nails in the parking lot because I would go in the morning and I would be the one, opening and setting things up. And there were nails on the ground in the parking lot for the tires, smashed windows, broken glass, different odd things smeared on
Yeah, the
the
vandalism
churches.
was going on for 3 months, and eventually they broke into the church. They stole our speakers. They stole our cameras multiple times. So that was a real fight. Why am I telling you all of this thing? Because in jail was very similar, and they've tried to assassinate me in prison. Remember when they unscrewed the tire of our pickup truck, right? That mom drove, and the tire just took off on its own. And the mechanic said that if this happened in the middle of the road, driving, you probably will have a head-on collision with another vehicle. So those people wanted us dead. They really wanted to hurt us. I was physically punched, attacked. We were bear sprayed. All kinds of things were happening to us. So when I was locked in prison later on, I learned from the inmates that protected me. And here's a fascinating part of the story, that when they learned it's me, I was all over the news, and they received newspapers, and they recognized me. They said to the guards, when I was taken to the concrete treatment, I was taken from my solitary cell to another one with concrete, no water, no washroom. They would bang on the doors and they would yell, "Free Pastor Art, free Pastor Art." And they said to the guards, "If anything happens to this man, watch your back." What I learned from the inmates is that the five different inmates received incentives to hurt me in prison, to murder me, to beat me up in prison by the guards. So they really were very serious in hurting me or killing me in jail. And that leads to another story later on with the political fixers, that I was told that there was a meeting between the prime minister, ex-prime minister Stephen Harper, and premier of Alberta Jason Kenney, and Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the so-called Conservative Party. The fixers, political fixers, told me that there was a meeting, and it has been decided that I must stop exposing the corruption within Canada, or I will go to prison and I will be assassinated in prison. So those people were very serious in
Now,
their
we
approach.
we don't we don't know whether or not those people were actual threats. Like there are certain names that they gave out that gave some credibility to it, but because of what happened next, and because of what happened with the court case, and because that you're on the side of God and God's protection, but we don't know. Well, you are safe, of course, but we don't know whether or not those people were actual fixers that had any kind of actual political power, or equally possible is that they were trying to scare you to bow and to stop what you're doing, which is another tactic that fixers do. So fixers were actually used in the Roman Empire
Yeah.
as well, and they
Yes, of
were
course.
either actual fixers, in which case they had political power and they could maneuver pieces as they wanted. They were wealthy, powerful people that did have that power. But also there were those that would just bully you. They would tell you, if you don't do that, it was blackmail and threats, and sometimes empty, sometimes they were actually substantial, but
Well,
we don't know.
in this case, we know that the threats were real because the name, the person that called me, is one of the biggest figures in the political realm in Canada. That's the same person that dealt with Putin under the Harper's government. So the threats were real. But again, allegedly, I was not present at the conversation between those people. I was told about the meeting and what was said during the meeting. So I get your point. So we can add allegedly. That's what was being told. In the end, I was told if I don't withdraw myself from the public life for at least 2 years, the judge Gordon Krinky, that's his name, the very judge that was appointed by the government to preside over my case. That's from the writing of the premier. Gordon Krinky was, I was told that is bought and paid for, and he was ordered to sentence you to prison, and you will be assassinated in prison. So, but going back to the story, what happened in prison, I was protected by the inmates, which is a fascinating part of the story. And because I was so popular, I had all of the inmates signing a petition to the director stating that if they don't let me out of the solitary to mingle with the people, there's going to be a riot. So I was 21 days later, I was let out only for brief moments to mingle with the other inmates. However, during that time, I organized church services, prayer meetings, Bible studies, and I became so popular that every inmate in my unit was attending those church services. And that scared them even more because what you were doing on the outside, you, mom, David, and the church, you were organizing protests outside of the prison, and you were blasting the four speakers at the facility demanding my release. Americans were phoning by the tens of thousands, political pressure, media, American media were putting pressure on the Canadian government for me to be released. All of those things, you church services outside, you continued the mission, and I was doing the same thing on the inside. You were doing this on the outside. Big rigs were coming, truckers were coming, all kinds of things. Jericho March was happening. So the pressure was unbelievable on the crooks. And my popularity in jail scared them so much that they literally kidnapped me. They came, shackled me up like an animal, and kidnapped me in a cage to Edmonton. And I was locked in MaxPod for the most dangerous terrorists in the land. I was the only inmate in the entire unit. Hundreds of people could be housed there. I was the only one, guarded by three guards. Then the next day was the bail hearing. The judge, I said my goodbyes to your mom, to my wife, because I realized it was freezing conditions, minus 28. I'm shivering. They refused to give me a blanket. My body's shutting down. I have not been eating for a very long time. I can't sleep. I can't function. I was allowed to leave my cell for 30 minutes. I received a document. Actually, it's in a book. And the document stated that I am so dangerous. It's right here. That's from the deputy director of the remand. And by the way, those papers, that's my manuscript. I was writing the book on the pieces of request forms that the inmates were giving me. In this document, it states that I am so dangerous that I have to be housed alone indefinitely. I think I reached my low point. I called your mom and I said, I think this is goodbye. I don't think they're going to let me out. I think I'm going to die here. You're going to hear I had a heart attack or this or that. And your mom did the right thing because she contacted the lawyers. The lawyers uh, panicked and sent a letter to the judge. The judge learns about my treatment, what is happening, and that scares the facility because people need to understand that the remand center is privately owned institution funded by taxpayers under the, it's overseen by the government, but it's a private business. So that scared them. And the next day they moved me and they put me into a psych ward without the evaluation of the doctors, without the knowledge of Alberta Health Services, completely illegal. And I was placed in a cell with a schizophrenic that murdered his
And
brother.
and as you know, of course, you're much more of an expert on this topic than I could be because you lived through it. That was a very popular tactic that was used by communists, especially. Nazis did it somewhat, but the communists were experts at this topic.
To this
To
day,
this,
they're using this
if
tactic.
you are somebody who's causing a problem, they will deem you insane, place you in a psych ward, and when you're in the psych ward, they will either cause you to actually go insane
Yeah.
or you might die.
Yeah, they would drug the people with all kinds of crazy drugs or experimental drugs. And Eventually, a person that would be released from a psych ward would not be able to function normally.
And the
You were
main and
never.
the main purpose, of course, is to discredit you as just an insane person. But however, in Canada, we actually have a process that needs to be fulfilled in order to for anyone to be placed in a psych ward, and that's the evaluation of a doctor and a professional that actually can place you into this facility for your own, well-being or whatever. However, they didn't do that with you. They bypassed any medical evaluation. This is all in, you can find this in the book. There's proof, there's documents. This was, of course, come to light at the court case that came about. But you were not evaluated. They bypassed the entire system, the procedure, and the legal apparatus in which they could actually place you into a psych ward, and they just did it for the sake of doing it.
Yes. So what they were trying to achieve is, throughout the process, I was offered a number of times to just bow. I was told by the lying, manipulative Crown Prosecutor Stephen Johnston that accused me of causing Canadian economy over $400 million worth of damages for my 19-minute sermon. He accused me of all kinds of different things. Those people are liars. They're professional con artists, manipulators. They offered me, if I say I'm sorry and I plead to one little thing, charge, I will be able to go home. So what they wanted their propaganda piece. They wanted to have the front page. Pastor Arpolowski pleads guilty. He says he's sorry, blah, 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 blah. They needed me for propaganda purposes. And of course, they were not achieving that because I was so popular. I was supposed to be depressed, broken, begging for help. And instead, I have become the most popular inmate in a history of that facility. I had every inmate at my church services. I had Muslims, atheists coming. I had them asking me to cast out demons out of their cells. I was laying hands on the people. I was leading them to the Lord. It was incredible. The gangsters were crying, tears coming to my cell. It was out of this world. So that scared them. That's why they kidnapped me to Edmonton. And then the judge learns about the treatment. They move me to a psych ward, place me with this schizophrenic that chopped his brother with the machete. I think they were hoping that he will murder me in jail, in that cell. I think that's what they were hoping for. But I did the same thing like I always do. I prayed for the guy and I started Bible studies. I started church services in prison. Eventually, because it's a long story, eventually I was released and placed on house arrest. As you remember, a year and a half I spent in house jail, house arrest, until I faced the judge, Gordon Krinky, that found me guilty on everything, including terrorism, for my sermon. Month later, the Crown Prosecutor, this lying, manipulative Crown Prosecutor Stephen Johnston, which is in a book, withdraw the terrorism charge because we challenged the validity of this charge under Constitution, the Charter arguments, and he withdraws that, leaves the mischief over 5,000 and the breach of a release order. I was found guilty on all of it, and eventually I was sentenced to prison, time served, and then released. We've appealed the decision. We've lost. The judges in the appeal sided with the presiding judge and upheld the decision, and the Supreme Court of Canada denied my right to an appeal. So as we speak right now, the story is over. If it comes to this aspect, I have become the first Canadian ever to be found guilty for a sermon, a peaceful sermon, where during my speech I told the people to stay peaceful. And I have been found guilty, criminally guilty, for telling people to stand for God and state given rights. In the meantime, I'm suing the Canadian government. We are still in courts. We're still fighting. Just another crooked judge found me guilty on another thing, and October 1st, I have to fetch another $17,000 in penalties to the government. And so the fight continues. We're crowdfunding this fight. I have lawyers. They One of the allegations we have against the government is them colluding with each other, a conspiracy that all those different government agencies came together colluding against me, my family, and the church. And guess what is happening? They come to the court together, colluding with each other, piling up all of them as one. So you've got Attorney General of Canada, you've got Alberta Health Services, you've got Government of Alberta, you've got police. I'm suing the Chief of Police, Newfield, and Canada Post, and other entities. The prison, of course, what they did, they all come together like a pack of wolves fighting us at every step of the way. Anything we do, they oppose us. Anything we want to, we want to speed the process, they throw a roadblock. And that's the game of trying everything in their power to prevent me from getting the justice. And I think the most important thing is getting the truth out of them. What really happened, why it happened, and who was behind it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, you can find all of that information in the book. And if you want to learn more, read the book. You can order it on Amazon, pathwayservices.com. It is incredibly detailed, and there's a lot to learn there. And of course, it'll be supporting. And if you do want to help out, as you know, and if you've been paying attention to the last 4 episodes that we've done, there's a lot that's going on. There's a lot that this ministry does, and there's a lot of people. It's not just you. It's not just my dad that's part of this. There's so many people that are part of this ministry that are helping and that are part of this church and this move, because there's just so much going on all the time. You're not only feeding the homeless and helping the most vulnerable people and preaching the gospel and shepherding a church, you're also fighting against tyranny. You're also fighting against corruption and a government that hates God and a government that hates Christianity. And you're there to say no and to stand up against that. So there's always so much going on, so much support that is needed, so much prayer that is needed. We need prayers, we need your support, we need your help, and be part of that. If you're watching this, be a part of it, help out. There's many ways to help, including prayer and donating and being a part, encouraging, whatever that looks like for you. There's many ways to help. And the story doesn't end there. There's so much more that we could talk about.
I mean,
We'll
that's
stop.
why I encourage you to read the book. There is so many things that we could talk about. I mean, we would be able to talk for another 3 4 hours about what happened in jail, the stories from jail, the background stories, the meetings in a court, the background story of why I was released, the city of Calgary phone line that was completely overpowered by the tens of thousands of people phoning. They had to move the switch, which they called it Artopolowski switch, to another city.
Yeah, the
Also, this is not just a story of Artopolowski. I want you to understand that they've targeted the entire family. My brother David was arrested with me 12 times. The pressure, the financial stress, and Nathaniel, here is a picture of Nathaniel testifying before the European Parliament for telling the people around the world what is happening in Canada. He himself was detained 10 times. Every time he crosses the border, he's being detained by the border security. And we tried to deal with this. $50,000 later, they said, well, we can't fix this. It's a computer glitch. So that's how they get you. They do insane things. Every time he crosses the border, he has to go to a different room. It's a paperwork, blah, blah, blah. And there is the Calgary police denies any knowledge of this. The border patrol says we can't do nothing. It's in the computer. So this is the government. This is the corruption of the government and the betrayal of those people. If I was in power, those people would be charged with treason. And I always say to the people, why would you vote for the very people that did this to you? If they didn't march with you, if they did not bled with you, if they didn't stand for you and your family, never again vote for them. Don't give them your vote. Find someone that is willing to fight for you. Yesterday, I did an interview with Grant Abraham. He founded a new federal party. And I say to the people, we have options. We are not stuck with the same players, con artists like we have right now. We can actually change our system. We can bring our beloved Canada back to Canada, because Canada left. It's gone. The Canada that your fathers remember, it's gone. It has been taken over by a corruption. But we can get it back by voting for different people. Don't vote for the same people, the same con artists, the revolving door, the voting for the lesser of two evils. We must change in order to see the change.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is so much we could talk about. We could go on and on, more episodes. But if you're listening, drop in the comments what would you like to hear us talk about for future episodes. This was the last introductory episode. From now on, we'll start talking about actual topics and ideas, and we'll be discussing it on a lower time frame. We're not going to be spending 2 hours to talk about something. We'll do short form videos so that it's easier to stay engaged and to really hear what we have to say. So drop in the comments what you would like us to talk about, and be involved, support, pray, be a part of this. And next time we'll stop with the introductory and the whole life story of my dad, our family, and we'll actually start talking about these different ideas. So for now, we'll see you in a couple weeks. We will continue, and we will give you that content. We will film these videos. We'll put them out. Maybe we will do different events, and we'll keep you updated about different things. There's lots going on in the world. There's lots to talk about, and we'll try to do this in an entertaining way to keep you engaged. I know that our attention span has dropped drastically in the last decade, so I know that you can only pay attention for a certain amount of time. I'm guilty of the same, so we'll try to keep it to 30 minutes, 45 minutes if there's something that has more to talk about. But next time we'll be actually talking about the Bible, history, politics, culture, events, trends, different things going on, and ideas. And we'll pick one topic and we'll try to stick to it and actually flush out our ideas and philosophies and different insights and what God's doing. We'll also keep you updated about things going on. From time to time, we'll drop an episode about things that are going on to keep you informed, and that you can be a part of this. Because again, this is not just our fight. This is not just my dad's fight. This is your fight as well. And you're a part of this. By watching, by supporting, you are part of the fight. You're not just on the sidelines watching. You're actually part of it and active in this and helping. And God will reward you for that. So thank you for listening. Drop in the comments what you would like us to talk about. Please help out. Order the book if you want to learn more. And we'll see you next time.